Heidi Love in the house, dropping knowledge and facts, uncovering the truth, no need for acting lax. She ain't afraid to speak her mind, breaking through the lies, rising up with love, taking us to new highs. We're living in a world full of secrets and deceit, but Heidi's here to expose, bringing truth to the beast. She's got a message, spreading it far and wide, from addiction to hope. She's on the other side. Ooh, yeah.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Unfiltered Rise with me, Heidi Love. And today I have with me author, theologian. He has multiple books out on this subject, Douglas Hamp. How are you today?
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
Yes, I'm happy you came. And sorry, I missed Dr. Douglas Hamp. I should have put that on there because that's a hard earn. I know I'm a registered nurse. I know you're a doctor of studies, but no matter what, that's a lot of school. So
Thank you.
Yes, of course. So these books, tell the people that don't know who you are a little bit about what you're up to.
Yeah, so I started writing Corrupting the Image over 10 years ago, before a lot of the advances in genetic engineering. Back then, we didn't have CRISPR, Cas9. So, I just started looking at the weird stuff in Genesis chapter 6, and I'm like, wait a second, something really weird is going on here. Then I went back to Genesis chapter 3, and I thought, I think I found a clue, right? Because it said there that God would cause enmity between you, speaking to Satan, and the woman, between your seed, Satan's seed, and her seed. And I was like, wait, her seed is the Messiah. So who is your seed? Right. And I was just like, this is crazy. Right. And that just set me off on this incredible journey to try to unravel all of that. And, I think I made some, well, they were pretty exciting for me. I'll say that these discoveries, they kind of blew my mind, and it's funny, when I finished Corrupting the Image Volume 1, I thought, well, I said everything I need to say on this. And then some years went by and I was like, oh my goodness, there's a whole lot more to say. In book 2, I started looking at the weird stuff in Revelation. Why is there a red dragon? Why is there a woman that rides a beast? I mean, these are very strange and odd kind of symbols here. And so what I did is I started going back into the ancient literature, and I found, well, there was a great red dragon named Enlil, who I discovered was Satan. And I discovered that there was a woman who rode the beast, and that was Ishtar, or Inanna. And I mean, just clear as day, the iconography is so on the nose. You're just like, whoa, okay, this is not a coincidence.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And then Corrupting the Image Volume 3, I was really focused on the two witnesses, because I feel like they are a missing piece of the puzzle. When I was studying eschatology and I spoke at conferences, nobody ever talked about the two witnesses. They were sort of like what are they doing in the book? Like they're kind of there's these two guys running around Jerusalem, but they're sort of minor players. And what I realized is they're major players. And
when they're spitting fire, we can't minimize them. Right? That's wild.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. These are all one big story when you start putting it all together. And, you start seeing the correlations and the crossovers between what happened in the ancient world with Nimrod and, Genesis chapter 6 with the Nephilim, and then what Jesus said would happen in the last days, before the return of the Son of Man. It would be like in the days of Noah. You're like, oh, I think there's a clue there, And so, I just kept unraveling it, and you keep thinking, okay, I'm getting to the end of this onion. I'm going to keep taking a layer off, and it just keeps going down, and you never get to the end of all the layers. And I do hope to write another book that will be essentially from the time of Satan being put into the abyss at the beginning of the millennium until he gets out, and shortly thereafter. Okay. And that's often where our eschatology stops, is with the second coming of Jesus. And they're like, okay, and they all lived happily ever after. But there's another story in there. I mean, it's amazing. And, Corrupting the Image is kind of a expose of the life and times of Satan, if you will, because, every good story requires an amazing bad guy. Right. I mean, that's what made Star Wars so epic, was Darth Vader. Right. I mean, he was such an incredible bad guy. He's still my favorite bad guy of all times, because I can still hear the music, I can feel the gravity of him walking, and he didn't have to say a lot. You're just like, oh my goodness, here he comes, you're dead. He's gonna do the neck pinch, and that's it. And like, wow, and so Satan is really the ultimate bad guy, and he doesn't necessarily think that he's in the wrong. He justifies it, and I show all this in the books, and I not just me making things up, but going and looking at the research to
Yeah.
see how he
Yeah.
could come to some of these conclusions. It's really quite amazing. But Scripture has incredible clues. So it's really exciting stuff. And so I do hope to write Cryptic Image Volume 4, because I really want to get into what the millennium is going to be like, what it will be like without Satan, what's going to happen when he finally gets out. I use a little holy imagination to kind of fill in some of the blanks, but there's enough in the Scripture that we can have a pretty good idea of what's coming.
Absolutely. And I mean, you have to use imagination because, like, we're not there yet. So, of course. And I think it's amazing how your books cross with, all of the Sumerian stuff. And that's really pushing mainstream right now, which is so weird. When I heard it on Joe Rogan, I think I dropped my drink. I was like, oh my gosh, are they saying the quiet part out loud? Like, what? And I just thought, okay. And that, I don't know if you saw that Cat Williams interview, but it was, to say the least, a bit shocking when you have that knowledge, but you're like, why are they talking about this? Like, they want this to go mainstream? Like, what? And so, I mean, the crossover is just kind of undeniable. I've had multiple people on about the Emerald Tablets, and people are just like, oh, it's just nothing to do with the Bible. Just that's over there, and this is over here. And I'm like, I don't know. It sounds so familiar.
Well, it's so amazing. So one of the questions I was asking in Corrupting the Image Volume 2 was, if Satan is real, as the Bible purports him to be real, why don't we find any mention of Satan or Lucifer anywhere in the ancient literature? I'm talking, before Christ, before the Babylonian captivity. We don't find any mention of Satan or Lucifer in the ancient world. So why is that? Okay, and I tell you, it was astounding. All right, so I have a friend, Dr. Bill Gallagher, who wrote a paper on the identity of Hillel ben Shachar in Isaiah 14:12. So Hillel ben Shachar, for those that don't know, in the English, it's Lucifer, son of the dawn, or something like that. All right, so but the word in Hebrew is the word Hillel. It's not Hallel, that means to praise, but Hillel, okay? And so my friend, Dr. Bill Gallagher, he traced it back to Elil in Akkadian, and then back to Enlil in Sumerian. And, that paper rocked my world, because, once I could see that connection, I just ran with it. I'm like, oh my goodness, he has given me the key to unlock so much. And I was so incredibly grateful, because once I saw that the one that's spoken of in Isaiah 14, that we always assume to be, we always associate that with Satan or, Lucifer, is really Enlil of the ancient world. And I was like, oh my goodness, like, check this out. Enlil was known as a great red dragon. You're like, oh, wow, okay, this is interesting. Enlil was also known as the Anzu bird, which was a kind of like a griffin, right? So it's kind of a lion type creature with feathers, wings. In some depictions, he has eagle's talons for his back feet, and some he has a scorpion tail. So it kind of morphed over the years, but you can see these general characteristics, right? And this was known as the Anzu bird, which was a symbol for Enlil. And guess, and one of these things, about 2200 BC, on what's called a cylinder seal. So they would take a little piece of stone, and then it would be all round, okay, and then they would carve into it, and then they would press it onto a little bit of clay, and it was kind of like an instant, instant picture, okay? It was an instant engraving that they could just do. It was really clever. But anyway, you can see that on his back is a woman, right, who's riding the beast. Who is the woman? Ishtar, Inanna, Ashtoreth, what name you want to use for her. And I'm like, oh my goodness, right there she is, right? The woman riding the beast, right? At least
Scarlet Woman.
BC. Yes,
Yes.
2200 BC. And guess what her epithet was? The mother of harlots. I'm like, oh my goodness, this is crazy, right? This
Yes.
isn't something new that John was coming up with. In fact, I'm not even sure if John had any personal knowledge of the ancient stuff. I mean, this is 2,000 years before John, right? That's a
Wow.
long time, right? 2,000
Yeah,
years
for
before John,
sure.
and they didn't have Google, right? So they weren't going back and just, looking up the pictures, right? It was probably mostly lost. So I think the Holy Spirit was saying, hey, I want you to see what's coming in the future is the same thing that was happening way back then. All right. But
Mhm.
it gets
Mhm.
juicier. This is what's so amazing. All right.
That's
So
awesome.
so the Anzu bird was also the symbol for Ninurta. Ninurta means Lord of the Earth, and he was the son of Enlil. Oh, okay, that's interesting, right?
Mm.
And Ninurta in the Bible is Nimrod. I was like, oh my goodness, this is crazy, right? So Nimrod literally means let's rebel. The three root letters in his name are Mem, Resh, and Dalet. Okay, Marad means to rebel. So you take those three root letters, Mem, Resh, Dalet, and you start looking around and you come up with Marduk. I'm like, okay, I've heard of Marduk, right?
Key
And then
player.
he's also known
Yes.
as Martu, right? Martu was the god of the Amorites. Remember, God said to Abraham, hey, know for certain that your descendants will be slaves. And in the fourth generation, I'll take them out because the sin of the Amorites is not yet complete, right? So their God was Martu. And I'm like, oh, okay, wait a second. This is
Mm.
crazy, right? Now take Martu and then take that into to Rome or Latin, and it becomes Martes, okay? And Martes or Mars. Like, oh my goodness, right? I mean,
Ah,
Mars is not a Latin word. It's a borrow, it's a loan word from, well, you guessed it, from the ancient Middle East or from, the ancient Near East. So I was like, this is crazy, right? So all roads kept leading back to ancient Babylon. Okay, and of course, ancient Babylon. Who established Babylon? Well, it's this guy named Nimrod, right? Or also known
right.
as Ninurta, who was the son of Enlil. I was like, oh my goodness, right? And so then in Genesis chapter 10, it talks about how Nimrod, right? He had real parents, but then he became a Gibor. You're like, wait,
Yes,
became
yes.
a Gibor? Like, what does that mean? Somehow he became a mighty one. So
Right.
something changed in his life, right? He wasn't born that way, but he became something different. And
Mhm.
again, that's really huge to understand that something transformed Nimrod. So the scripture doesn't give us all the clues, but looking at the ancient Near Eastern texts, we can sort of surmise what was going on. So Enlil, Satan, he becomes the father of Ninurta, and he
Mm.
gives Ninurta the tablet of destinies. Right now, where did Enlil get this tablet of destinies? Glad you asked. He got it from, well, he didn't get it. He usurped it. He stole it from Anu, the creator god. And Enlil took earth as his portion, and Anu, the creator god, took heaven as his portion. Sound familiar? Right? I
It
mean, this is
does.
exactly what happened. Right? So we go back to Genesis 1, 2, and 3. And what does God do? He creates the heavens and the earth, and then he gives the keys, the dominion, to Adam and Eve. And he says, here are the keys, right? Genesis chapter
Mhm.
3, Satan says, hey, check out that fruit. Well, why don't you try eating it? See what happens,
It's
right?
yummy.
And I was like, this one, crunch, right? And, and when he does that, he enters into death. He becomes, he starts dying. Well, Satan in the Bible is known as the god of death in Hebrews chapter 2. In the ancient world, Enlil was known as the god of death, right? He was the one who ruled over the underworld. And there's all kinds of epithets for that, right? So I'm just like, I'm
Right.
peeling the onion layers back, and I'm like, oh my gosh, it just never ends, Like it just keeps going. Um, and so I discovered that and I don't want to get too geeky about this stuff, but there are these different names for Enlil that are not always obvious. Okay, but one of his epithets was Oog, which meant death and enmity. I'm like, death and
Mm.
enmity, huh? Okay, that's interesting. Because God said in Genesis 3, I will cause enmity between you and the woman, right? So there's that enmity part. And then Og, if you translate that or transliterate it into Hebrew, it becomes Og. So King Og of Bashan,
Ah,
right? And again, my mind is spinning, right? And I'm trying to put
right.
all these, I'm trying to connect all these dots. And I'm like, there's so many dots. I just can't put them all together, right?
Wow.
But Og of Bashan. All right, so Bashan is not a Hebrew word. It actually comes from Akkadian. It's Bashmu in Akkadian. Now, Bashmu is a serpent dragon. All right. So, and again, I have this all in the book. There's all kinds of ancient iconography of what this thing looked like. Basically, it was a serpent with two front feet, two short front feet. So it was some kind of a serpent that was, kind of crawling and kind of slithering.
Mm.
And that was another symbol for Enlil, right?
Wow.
And guess what? Up by Gilgal Rephaim, which is in the northern part of Israel, there's a circle of the Rephaim, and just a little bit north of that, there is a geoglyph where what looks like a bashmu, looks like a long serpent. It's about 6/10 of a mile long. Okay, so it's very long.
Oh, wow.
And you can see it from space. If you want to go to Google Earth, I invite people to do that. Go to Google Earth, put in Gilgal Rephaim, and then just pan out a little bit, and you will see what looks like a serpent etched into the side of the mountain, or in the side of the earth. Okay, and like, okay, so what's that thing doing there? Well, it's in the land of Bashan. Bashan comes from Bashmu, serpent dragon, right, or dragon snake, whatever. And Og, the king of Bashan, right? So you're like starting to put all these pieces together. I was like, this is blowing my mind,
Oh,
right?
I
So
bet. I bet you
yeah,
were kind
all
of
this stuff.
freaking out at that point.
Yeah,
I would
you know,
be.
and
Yeah.
I kept digging, and so in Sumerian you have what are called logograms. A logogram is kind of like a cartouche in the Egyptian expression. So a king might have a cartouche, right? And that would sort of be his personal signature, or that was his brand logo, if you will. All right. So a logogram, as it suggests. So basically, Enlil, he had two uh, two lines, just kind of two parallel lines. And if you kind of know what the Sumerian, like they press this stylus into a little bit of soft clay, and so it would kind of leave like a wedge at one side and then a line. So there's these two lines. The name of that thing in Sumerian is Bad. Okay, B-A-D, bad, right? Bad,
Bad.
and it means death or enmity, right? So there was a stele that was found by Charles Warren in about 1859, something like that, that was then taken to the British Museum. And on this stele, it talks about the angels who came down in the days of Noah, and they did something, right? So, I keep hearing about this thing, and I'm like, I need to figure this thing out, because the translation that I heard regarding this stele was that according to the command of the most holy God, those taking an oath proceed from here. And I'm like, okay, if this is parallel to what it says in the book of Enoch, which is that 200 bad angels came and that's when they started mating with women, I'm like, they wouldn't do it according to the command of the holy God, because the holy God would never say to do that, right?
Yeah, no,
So,
definitely
so
not okay.
yeah. So I went to the British Museum website. I found the stele, and I'm looking at it. I'm looking at the Greek, and I'm like, okay, I'm not the greatest Greek scholar in the world, but my Greek's pretty good. And it doesn't say holy. There's this word batios. And I'm like, what in the world does that mean? So I'm looking at it. I'm trying to figure out this word. I can't find it in any lexicon anywhere. It's not a Greek word. So long story short, what I discovered, and I confirmed this with a Sumerian expert, right? Because I'm not a Sumerian expert. So I'm like, am I crazy? Or do you see what I'm
Am
saying?
I crazy?
You know,
You probably felt that way at this point, because this is a lot of knowledge. This is great.
it is. Well, you got to be careful, because, you can start inventing things, right? If you're not careful.
Right.
And so you want to get a second opinion and just say, am I nuts here, or could I be onto something?
Right.
And so what I was thinking is, could it be that the word bad became a loan word that made its way into Greek, and then it became Hellenized, it became, Greekified, and now it's just on this inscription, not as a Greek word, but as a loan word from Sumerian. And um, this Sumerian scholar, um, out of Finland, he's like, no, I think you're onto something. In fact, there's precedence for this. So I was like, oh my
Oh,
goodness, this is
wow.
crazy, right? So again, long story short, what I discovered is that it doesn't say according to the command of the great and holy God. It says according to the command of Batios, or Bad, the god Bad, those taking an oath proceed from here. I'm like, this is
Mhm.
insane, right? Because what it's saying is the angels that came down according to the book of Enoch, they came down according to the command of Satan, according to the command of Enlil, right?
Right.
According to the command of the god of death, and that's who they got the command from. So it was Satan himself
Mhm.
who told them to do this, right? The Bible doesn't tell us that. It's sort of, we can infer that from Scripture that it was Satan's big idea, but it doesn't
Right.
specifically say that. It just says that when men began to multiply in the face of the earth and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God took the daughters of men and they made these Nephilim babies. Okay. So, but now we have an ancient text that is actually saying this. And again, it blew my mind. Right.
So
So, like, it was just so exciting to dig into this stuff. It really did hurt my head a number of times because
uh, I can
I'm looking,
imagine.
I'm just looking at all this data and I'm like, am I nuts, or am I seeing something here? And you keep
Right.
digging and digging and digging, and then you dig some more and you're like, no, I think I actually see this. Right. And, but it was hard
Well, then
because,
you
this is
yeah.
uncharted territory. Yeah.
Well, and then you pull it together with the future. Let's go to every Super Bowl ever when a woman comes out on a beast, like
Yes.
every single time in a
That's right.
red dress. And then all these other things that, like, okay, in the Bible, it also is said that Jesus came to teach to every man and animal and beast. And so,
Mm,
and creature, right? The creature thing got me because I was like, is that for the people that are maybe tainted with this weird Nephilim stuff and we can't help it? You know what I mean? Or whatever. Like, who knows? I mean, but I think the coverage is like full. You know what I'm saying? Like, he said creature. I found that interesting. I'm like, who are the creatures? I'm not talking about the actual fallen ones. I'm talking about people inadvertently possibly having some weird junk DNA that, could possibly be part of this. Who knows? But I mean,
yeah.
because it can't just fizzle out. I don't believe that.
Yeah.
And I think that's why the DNA testing became such a big deal. I think they're looking for
Yeah.
the gene of Isis or Genesis, right? That blew my mind. That one messed with me. But this whole
Yeah.
thing, yeah,
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
so get this. Genesis, or excuse me, Revelation chapter 9 talks about these creatures, 200 million creatures that will come out of the abyss, right? So I was looking at this thing and I'm like, so something really weird is going to come out. But what I had to do is I had to kind of look at, it has both the fifth trumpet and the sixth trumpet. What I did is I took those two descriptions and I superimposed them one over the other, right? And when I did that, I came up with this image that was spot on, 100%
Oh,
what we see in the ancient world. So I talked about this Anzu bird. Okay, the Anzu bird is this lion-esque type of creature with eagle's talons. Sometimes it has a scorpion's tail. It's got wings. All right. Well, as time progressed, that became a little more stylized. So it was a little bit more horse-like, but still with some of the lion type features. And then and the features became more pronounced in the iconography. Right. I think they were always there. They just weren't always 100% clear. Actually, I kind of take that back because we do have something that goes back to about um, I think it was either 3 or 4,000 BC in the area of Arad. All right, and basically it is it's a centaur with wings. It's got eagle's talons. It has a man's head and a lion's head. It has a scorpion's tail. And then get this. This is the part that kind of blew me away.
This sounds
Because if you look
scary,
in,
by the way.
yeah, so in
Yeah.
Revelation 9, it talks about a scorpion's tail, and then it says it has another tail, and it has a serpent's head on this other tail. All right, so this is where I had to say, okay, something's going on here. I can see the scorpion's tail, and I see that in the iconography. But what I couldn't figure out was the serpent, the tail with the serpent's head. All right. Well, again, I did a little digging, and it turns out that another word for tail is a phallus. Okay. So what I found on this inscription was it's called a kuduru stone, right? So this is a stone with the picture of a god, the god Nergal, on it, and they would put it underneath the doorpost, and so this was kind of sort of good luck to kind of ward off anybody that shouldn't be there. And they would put this on the floor, right? So this was really popular about 1200 BC. So on this thing, they had this god Nergal, the god of death, mind you, okay? And again, it's centaur-like. He's got, obviously a human torso coming up, human head, lion's head. He's got a bow and arrow. He has a scorpion's tail. And then down below, right, he's got a serpent head phallus. And I'm like, oh my goodness, this is,
Sounds
this is
crazy.
100% match. 100% match, right? I couldn't believe it. I'm like, this is crazy. That's exactly what we see in Revelation chapter 9, right?
Wow.
Exactly. Now, here's what's interesting, right? This is where all this stuff starts to coalesce. Remember, Jesus takes his disciples where? To Caesarea Philippi. Now, Caesarea Philippi was not exactly a kosher place, okay? This was all kinds of pagan gods and rituals and bad stuff, right? So why would Jesus take his disciples there? And then he says, hey, that the gates of Hades will not prevail against his ecclesia or his church, whatever you want to call it, right? And then it says 6 days later, he took Peter, James, and John up on a high mountain, and there he transfigured before them. Now, if you know your geography, Caesarea Philippi is at the base of Mount Hermon. Aha, right? And now Mount Hermon is, according to the book of Enoch, where the 200 angels came down. That's where we found the stele was on top of Mount Hermon. Mount Hermon has been called Mount Hermon from the most ancient of times. Hermon it means to take an oath. All right. So this is an oath saying, hey, if I don't do this, let this happen to me. Right. And that's what we found on the stele, is that the 200 angels said, hey, we're doing this thing according to the command of the god Batios. Right. And those who take it proceed from here. Right. So they came down, they took this oath that if we don't fulfill our obligations, may something bad happen to us. And this mountain is mentioned in Psalm 68, where it says, oh, you mountain of Bashan, this is where God has desired to set up his place, right? And so Jesus goes up there. He reclaims Mount Hermon as his mountain, the mountain of Bashan as his mountain, and says, no, this is now my stomping ground. And you guys down below, the gates of Hades, you're not going to prevail. So here's what the first century Jewish apocalyptist was thinking. They believed that the gates of Hades were not like there to defend so nobody could get in. No. They were expecting the gates to fling wide open. And for any moment, millions of the creatures from the abyss to come flooding out and to cause the apocalypse. Okay. Well, guess what? That's what Revelation tells us, right? Is that that this star, having fallen from heaven, is given the key to the abyss, and he's going to open it. And guess what? 200 million scary creatures are going to come flying out of there.
It's going to be a fun day.
Oh my goodness.
Oh my gosh.
I think Satan was planning on doing that back in the first century. And I think Jesus had to go there and say, not going to happen. Right?
Not today. Not today, Satan.
Yeah, not today, Satan. I'll let you do it later, in so roughly
Mhm.
2,000 years, more or less, but not today. Today, this is
Mhm.
my day, right? And you guys who want to come flying out of there and shooting your arrows and causing hell on earth, not going to happen today. Right now, my day. And then he goes up on top of Mount Hermon and he puts out this fantastic light show, right? And as he's coming down from the mountain, he tells Peter, James, and John, now don't tell anybody. Isn't that weird? I mean, why would he go up there, transfigure, and he says, no, don't tell anybody? Okay. I mean, it's really weird.
Like, they're
I
probably
actually
like,
think,
"Can you imagine that?" Can you imagine holding on to that one?
oh, yeah.
Oh.
And, it says, don't tell anybody till the Son of Man has been glorified, which obviously after his death. So I think he was putting on a light show, you're in big trouble, Satan show for Satan.
Mhm.
Okay. I think it was primarily for Satan. I mean, certainly later generations are benefiting from this, but I think at that time, this was to put Satan on notice. Hey, I'm coming for you, dude. you know,
Mhm.
right? And I
Claiming
think
his
Satan was
territory.
quaking. I think he was quaking in his boots. He's like, oh my gosh, that it's today. It's happening. It's going down.
Yeah.
Now, according to Sun Tzu, the best way to fight a war is to not fight at all, right? So,
Mhm.
look, if you can get Jesus to somehow die on the cross, maybe that'll take care of this. So Satan himself goes into Judas personally, and gets Judas to betray the Son of Man, et cetera, et cetera. And we know the whole story, right? Jesus goes to the cross,
Okay.
right? So then he's on the cross, right? Psalm 22, Eli, Eli, lama shvaktani, right? My God, why have you forsaken me, right? So why is this whole thing? And then um, it says that mighty bulls of Yireh Bashan, these mighty bulls of Bashan, have encircled me. You're like, wait, I don't remember any bulls of Bashan encircling Jesus when he was on the cross. But these avirim are actually not bulls in the classic sense of a cow, okay? But it's actually a word that it refers to spiritual beings that are bull-like. All right. So there are spiritual beings that are bull-like. In fact, the same word for avirim is used says when men ate angels' food, right? Um, Psalm 73. And so, like there it is, like angels of some sort, good or bad, right? So these are the bad angels, and they're related to this area of Bashan, the Mount of Bashan, right? I was like, oh my goodness. So this is telling us that when Jesus was on the cross, you had these spiritual entities, these fallen angels who were surrounding him and they were mocking
You're
him, you
You're
know?
freaking me out right now. I'm gonna tell you this. I don't know if you're familiar with, Mormonism and baptisms for the dead, but
Mm,
invoking things in that temple, and I'm telling you, I did all the temple rites, but there is a baptismal font surrounded with oxen, golden oxen, and they put the
mm,
kids in there and baptize them in the name of dead people, and I'm like,
wow.
you're freaking my brain out right now because 'cause I'm like, "Oh my
Wow.
gosh." Yeah, maybe they
That's
know some
crazy.
stuff.
That's
Who
wild.
knows? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So,
I didn't know that.
King David was giving us a picture into the spiritual realm. And I think this was part of Satan's plan. I mean, obviously, it's part of Satan's plan, is that if Jesus could not do his superhero Messiah stuff and come with all the chariots of God that are thousands upon thousands and myriads, right? He couldn't do any of that stuff. If he was dead. I think that was Satan's thinking. Hey, if you're dead, then you become part of my kingdom, and
Mhm.
the show's over. We're pretty cool, right?
Game over. Yeah.
And of course, Paul tells us that that those rulers would never have done that if they'd understood what was really going on.
Right.
So, so what happens? Satan kills Jesus, right? Jesus allows himself to be killed, I should say. But Satan's thinking, I got you, right? I put you on the cross, now you're dead. He goes into the grave, right? There you go, done, over. but First Peter 4 tells us that Jesus went down to the spirits in prison and that he proclaimed, right? It's not the word good news. It's actually this word proclaim is to make a public announcement
Mm.
to those spirits who were formerly disobedient in the days of Noah. So I think what he was doing is, it may have been good news for some of the human people down there, but I think it was really bad news for the spiritual entities that in the days of Noah came down, those 200 angels that had been locked up in chains of darkness until the judgment of the last day. I think they've been down there and they're like, man, when do we get out of here? And Jesus comes and says, hey, I'm going to need those keys, the keys of Hades and death. Those are now mine. I just bought them, right? Because you brought me down to your kingdom thinking that I would just stay here. But no, death cannot hold me. And I'm not staying. And as I'm leaving, I'm going to take the keys and I'm going to say thank you, because now I have the keys of death and Hades. I mean, isn't this cool, right? And
Yes.
Jesus talks about this in Revelation. Hey, I got the keys of death and Hades, right?
Right.
And so here's what's so amazing. This is what I've really learned in the books is that, sometimes, I've heard people say, well, why didn't Jesus just die immediately after Adam and Eve sinned? I'm like, well, because it's about authority. God gave the authority to Adam. And when Adam ate of that fruit, he forfeited that authority. And guess what? It fell to Satan, right? It fell to Satan. Why? Because Satan was the prime minister. He was the caretaker. He was the one in charge of planet Earth. It says that in Ezekiel chapter 28, that he was the anointed cherub who covers. He says, I placed you in Eden, okay, and you defiled your sanctuary. So he was supposed to look over Adam and Eve. He was the caretaker, the guardian. But instead of taking care of them, he said, here, eat some poison. Let's see what happens. And the whole idea is, hey, if the heirs die, then it falls to me, right? And guess what? The heirs died, right? The heir died. And so then it falls to the caretaker. He becomes the de facto king of the earth, the God of this world, which Jesus said many times. Remember when Satan took Jesus up on top of a high mountain? That was Mount Hermon, by the way. And he says, he shows him all of the kingdoms of the world. He says, hey, all of this has been delivered to me, and I can give it to whoever I want. So, just bow down and I'll give it to you. I know you came here to save all this stuff. I know you came to save humanity and get it all back. No worries. It's been delivered to me, and I'll give it to you free of charge. Well, except for just, this little thing, just bow down to me. Thankfully, Jesus didn't take the bait, right? And, he earned it the hard way, but he earned it, So he took back the legal, in a legal way. He bought it back. He redeemed it. That's the whole point, right? Because it's not that Jesus isn't and wasn't more powerful than Satan. He always has been more powerful. So it's not about who can win the arm wrestling contest. It's about who has the legal authority. And that's what I think that was the brilliance of Satan's plan, is that when Adam forfeited by eating of that, then the legal authority passed to him, and there was nothing that God could do. Nothing. Right. And he's like, oh, I won. I'm so smart. I outfoxed God, because there's no way he can undo this on a legal basis. Sure, he's more powerful, but he's also just. And so God always has to do the right thing. And so according to the law, I won. I outfoxed God according to the law. And it was so simple. It was like taking candy from a baby. How could God be so stupid? Right. But of course, God wasn't stupid. God said, hey, because you've done this, there'll be enmity between you and the one between your seed and her seed. You'll strike his heel, but he's going to crush your head. Right. And I think that lingered over Satan's mind for a couple millennia. He's like, some dude's coming to crush my head. Jesus shows up, fits the bill. He's like, going to crush my head, huh? Well, I'm going to make sure you don't. And of course, he fell into the very trap that God had set for him. And he thought he was setting a trap for God, right?
Matching wills there. Yes.
It's amazing. It's just so amazing. So understanding that background then sets us up for what's coming in the future. And the two witnesses are going to come. They are going to, proclaim to the world that God is coming. The king is coming. How do I know this? Well, they're clothed in sackcloth, right? The sackcloth is the vestment of a prophet who would tell people to repent, right? When Jonah went to Nineveh, everybody put on sackcloth because they're like, oh boy, we're in trouble, right? So that was what you did when you were mourning and you were repenting and you were hoping that God would be really nice to you. So these prophets come and they're going to tell the world, the king is coming. Well, the world's like, yeah, I don't think we like this king of yours, we're not so excited. All right. Now they're going to try to stop the two witnesses, but guess what? The two witnesses aren't, well, they've got superpowers, right? They have the ability to call fire down from heaven. They can strike the earth with plagues as often as they desire. They can turn water to blood. They can stop it from raining. It's going to be crazy. I mean, crazy bad what these guys do to the planet. And nobody can stop them because it says if anybody tries to kill them, they will call it on fire, and that'll be the end of those guys. Just like Elijah did when the king of Israel tried to stop him, and he sent 50 soldiers, and he says, if I'm a man of God, let fire come down and destroy you guys. And they were done, and then he sends another regiment and they die. And then the third one is like, please don't kill me. and so that'll be the same idea. But then it says the beast who comes up out of the abyss will come and he'll kill the two witnesses, right? So this is huge, right? So somehow all of humanity could not stop the two witnesses, but then the beast comes and he's able to kill these two. I think this is where we're going to fight fire with fire. The world's going to finally understand, if we want to defeat these two, we can't use our weapons of flesh and bone, our weapons of technology, but we need some other kind of weapon, something on their level that can stop them. I mean, remember, nobody can kill Superman except people that come from the same planet around Krypton,
Right.
and then they're equal to him and they can actually overcome him. That's the basic idea. So Satan is on, Satan or the beast will be on equal spiritual power with the two witnesses, and then he's able to overcome them, right? And this is, again, I think it's, I guess, hats off to Satan. I think it's very clever, as I've discovered through the scriptures, etc. But thank God he's going to ultimately fail. But it's very clever. And, I think what it translates into, though, kind of taking it out of that Sunday school mentality, the felt board or the coloring books. We often think of, the Bible in those terms, but we've got to get away from that and think, okay, let's think like sci-fi, because I think sci-fi has been telling us, and
I do too.
people that have been witnessing UFOs for the longest time. Okay, so
and the
UFOs,
occultists, but nobody wants to listen to that because it's it's that. But I do study that, and I see a lot of this stuff, and I'm like, oh, yep, there it is. I mean, they try,
Well, there's a movie that came out called The Eternals. It's a Marvel thing.
Yes.
And I was like, oh my goodness, it's just right on the nose. They're just telling us exactly, right? So in the movie The Eternals, these guys are sort of guardians of planet Earth, and they're not supposed to do anything unless something really terrible, which I think it's the deviants that come and start messing things up, okay? But turns out that these Eternals are the ancient gods, right? They're the ancient god, Baal and Ashtoreth and Marduk, right? These are all the ancient gods that have just been hanging around protecting planet Earth. And, if something gets too crazy, then they're supposed to spring into action and save the day, right? Well, if we just put that in the context of these aliens and UFOs that have been hanging out, they've been living here for the longest time, and they're basically the protectors of planet Earth. Right. This is the conclusion of George Knapp. He's a ufologist, and he was asked, where do you think these UFOs come from? He says, I think they've always been here. They probably live in the oceans or something like that. And they simply are separated from us by a thin cosmic psychical dimension or membrane, a thin psychical dimensional membrane. All right. And I heard him say this, a thin psychical dimensional membrane. I'm like, that's what the veil that's the veil. The Bible talks about the veil, right? And, so the demons behind the veil and the UFOs or aliens behind the veil, it's the same thing. It's one and the same thing. And,
Mhm.
they're here because they have a vested interest in planet Earth. And if it ever should get too crazy, then they will spring into action to help us. All right. So now imagine God is sending the two witnesses to tell the planet, hey, I'm coming back. All right. Get ready. And the world's like, we don't want you. We don't like your two witness guys.
A
And
big
so they
surprise.
find, yeah. So then
Yeah.
Satan, shows up as an alien, right? He's not coming as Satan with a pitchfork. He's coming as an alien and says, hey, I see you got a problem with these two witness guys. I'm here to help.
Mm.
I just need to make sure everybody's in agreement with me and we're all on the same page. So yeah, just sign this little contract I have. Okay. And that's the contract, the covenant with death and Sheol that's spoken of in Isaiah 28. The
Mm.
covenant with death and Sheol, right? We see the same duo in Revelation chapter 6, where it says that all authority, the whole world was under the authority of death and Hades. Hades, Sheol, same thing, right? So we
Mhm.
see the same dynamic duo in both places. Death and Hades, death and Sheol, same thing. So the world is going to be under their authority. I was like, oh my goodness, it's crazy. And as I was looking there in Revelation chapter 6, I used to hear that, well, 1/4 of humanity is going to be under the power of death. But I went back and I looked
Mhm.
at this word. I'm like, wait, it doesn't say humanity. It says the earth. It's the Greek word
Mhm.
ge, right? So like geo, right? So I'm like, wait a second. And then I had this hunch. I'm like, I wonder how much of the Earth's surface humanity actually lives on. Okay. Because I was like, I
Not a
know
lot.
that 72% is water. So, how much of the Earth do we actually live on? So I found this study by Tobler et al., like 1997. So they did all this study and they discovered, ready? Drum roll, please. They discovered that
Already.
humanity lives on 25.4% of the Earth's total surface area. And I'm like,
Mm.
oh my goodness, right? Right? Because that's what it says. It says that 1/4 of the Earth is under the authority of death
Uh-huh.
and Hades. I was like, oh, that's crazy, right? So basically, everywhere people live will be under the authority of death and Hades, which is death is Satan, right? Well, that's what we taught. We started with
Mhm.
Enlil,
Mhm.
right? And so that's where I just, again, I had to go back and all the way back to the very beginning, as far as I could possibly go in book 2.
Right.
And then in book 3, I could start putting all these things together, right? And people are like, what about book 1? Well, book 1, I touched on a lot of these different topics, um, and I found some amazing stuff. But I just got to go so much deeper in books 2 and 3. I think people will
Wow.
really, really enjoy that. So just to kind of bring it all around, because I know we're
Yeah.
running out of time, but to kind of bring it all around, um, this brings us to the mark of the beast, and this is where in book 1, I talk a lot about the genetics of the mark of the beast and the genetics of the incarnation. Those are both very important to
Mhm.
understand what's going to happen. So,
And no rush for me, don't worry. Unless
okay.
you're rushed, I'm good. I don't want you to feel rushed.
Yeah. So, um, the genetics of the mark of the beast, what I've discovered is that the mark of the beast is going to be a genetic hybridization between Satan and humanity. And it sounds kind of crazy, right? But again, in book 1, I talk about.
No, nope, I think you're onto it because I'm a registered nurse too, and so when I
Okay.
go down weird, pathways and then the whole stuff with, like, not being able to die, like, men will bake for death and not be able to die, that struck me. I do think it's going to be exactly what you're talking about. Yep.
Yeah. Well, I started looking into the word seed, and I was like, what is a seed? I'm looking at a watermelon seed, you got the husk and you got the kernel. I'm like, what's inside of that? Right. You get
Right.
down to the chromosomes and the genes. What's inside of that? Well, you got the double helix. What's inside of that?
Mm,
Nucleic acids. What's inside of that? Well, nothing tangible, but something
mhm,
very substantial, which is
right.
information. All right. And I read this book by Dr. Werner Gitt. In the beginning was information. And he has these different postulates. And he says that information is a non-material entity that requires a physical medium, right? And it was, again, another light bulb that just went off in my brain. I'm like, oh my goodness, right?
Right.
Information, right? And, of course, we're in the information age. We're dealing with this, or maybe we're beyond the information age already. I don't know. But, still we send emails and texts and all this different stuff, right? Where do those things exist? I mean, what are these little things? They're real. We
Yeah.
know them. When we get a text,
Mm,
it's real, but it's virtual, right? I mean,
right.
it doesn't exist in our plane of existence, but it kind of
Mhm.
does, right? And I was like, oh my goodness, a seed is information that's non-material, but it requires a physical carrier, right? So just like
Mhm.
I need a phone or some device in order to see, to interact with that non-material information, so too inside of our DNA, there's information, but it has to be housed in some kind of a physical medium. And it was, again, just ding ding ding, right? I was like, oh my gosh, this is
Right.
crazy, right? And so this is what I think is that Satan, who he's not terrestrial, he's not earthly, but he has information, and somehow he's
Right.
going to make it so that his information will then transfer into a person, the beast, the Antichrist, and
Mhm.
then that person is going to replicate it and make it available for all humanity. Right. So I
Mm.
came across this study by about a guy named Chris out of Reno, Nevada. Blew my mind. Right. So Chris had leukemia. He uh, was able to get some bone marrow from a donor in Germany. Right. And this forensics
Mhm.
lab was tracking him before he got it and after. And what they discovered is that the DNA in his blood began to change to that of his donor, and then the DNA in his semen began to change to that of his donor,
Mm.
right? And Chris is on record saying, it's pretty wild that I can disappear and somebody else can appear in my place, right?
Wow.
So genetically, he's being changed into that of into his donor. You're
So
like,
weird.
huh? Isn't that weird?
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I extrapolate from that if Satan can somehow give his DNA, his information,
Mhm.
to a man, this man, this Antichrist beast figure, will then start to become this hybrid creature. He'll start to
Mm.
become, the imprint of Satan. He'll become the avatar of Satan,
Mm.
and then he's going to then replicate that. He'll use DNA printers, etc., and he'll then give this to humanity. Why would humanity want to do this? Not everybody
Right.
wants to become a god or something like that. Well, fear. Fear is what's going to drive this whole thing. Because remember, after he kills the two witnesses, what happens? The two witnesses come back to life. And
Right.
it's a great fear spread to everybody, right? They're really scared at this point. So now, the two witnesses, they ascend into heaven. There's this big voice that says, come up here. Well, you don't have to be a genius to figure this out. They've been telling you that the king is coming back. They rise again. Well, the king's going to come back, right? And it says that the whole world is going to be gathered to make war against the Lamb, right? Everybody, right? So they're expecting him to come. And there's a strong delusion that's going to be happening as well, with all signs and lying wonders. So what's the delusion? Well, the delusion is we can actually beat him, right? We can beat
Right.
Jesus. But how would you do that? Well, if you think that you've now taken this mark of the beast, which makes you into a god, it gives you superpowers, super abilities, super intelligence. Maybe you become this hive mind kind of creature, and if God is only powerful because he has evolved over, eons, well, what if we could evolve? What if we could
Right.
become powerful as well? And, Mr. Enlil, Satan, is telling us that we can, by taking on his DNA, we can actually become gods ourselves. And it's like, wow, So again, it brings it all into focus. And then I think, of course, we got Armageddon, this epic battle. And
Yes.
humanity's thinking, we're going to win, we're going to win because
Right.
we're united. We're going to all do this together. Anybody that doesn't want to stand for this, that's not with us, is clearly our enemy. They need to be taken
Mm.
out. They need to be destroyed. And that's when the executions begin to happen, because they know that the king is coming. They know that Jesus is coming. Maybe they don't think of him as Jesus or, whatever, the Bible, who knows? They probably think he's some evolved alien that we don't like too much, Uh,
Right.
so they don't think of him as the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords and the Almighty. They're like, yeah, he's powerful, clearly, but we can take him. And I think that's where the delusion is going to happen. Like, talk
Oh
about
boy.
delusional. Do you think you can beat God? You are delusional, right? But
Yeah, no, not gonna happen.
yeah.
Yeah. Oh my. Like, I mean, I just think that especially in this time frame, like with everything changing, especially in Israel, then the red heifer thing, it's like a weird time. And I think we have to be really dutiful to be watching. Like, don't
Mm,
panic. Just
yeah,
educate.
right.
Educate, right? We're supposed to live each day normally until the coming. We're not supposed to freak out. But like also you have to learn, even things that don't, I mean, like people are like, why do you care about the red heifers? You're not Jewish. I'm like, well, there's some things like you have to learn, I don't know. What do you
Hmm.
think about all this end time stuff lately?
Well, I think,
Eclipses,
you know,
heifers.
it's hard to say. I mean, I've been hearing about red heifers for a very long time. I think it's significant that we're in sort of the era where a red heifer is significant,
Hmm.
but I'm a little bit skeptical that, the next news cycle of the red heifer is going to be the one, right? Eventually, but people start hearing like, oh my gosh, it's here, and I'm like, well, it's been here, and we're getting closer, but I'm not too alarmed about the red heifer. But I think it's a sign. It's a sign that we're getting close. Um, that Israel came back into existence as a modern, nation state. I think that's a big deal.
Hmm.
I think that's part of prophecy. It's not the complete fulfillment of prophecy, but I think it's a big part of that. And um, you know, again, the eclipses, they do happen every 3 or 4 years. So I
Hmm.
think, because it happened over in North America, and we Americans think that we're the epicenter of the world, that
Yes.
this must be it. Like, well, okay, but they happen all the time. So
Right.
I don't know. I'm a little, I that things are falling into place, yes, but that the sky is falling tomorrow, no.
No,
Right. And I think that's where we
no.
got to be very careful because,
Yeah.
you know, I remember 2005, I thought it was it. 2011, I thought it was it. 2012, I thought it was it.
Yeah.
The blood red moons, these have all come and gone. And when you start to break them down, like the blood red moon thing, like, well, see, it says that the moon's going to turn blood red. Yeah, but not from an eclipse. That's not at all what it's saying. If you go back and you actually look at the text in Revelation chapter 9, it says that he opened up the abyss and great smoke came out of it. And guess what that smoke did?
Mhm.
It covered the sky. And when you looked at the sun, it looked like sackcloth, and the moon looked like blood red. Okay. And
Mm.
I can attest this. I've seen the moon through forest fires where there's lots of ash in the sky
Mhm.
and it looks
Yeah.
blood red, right?
Yeah.
So it's not about an eclipse, it's about all the smoke that's coming up out from the abyss that's going to filter into the sky. And then when you look at the sun, it looks like it's sackcloth. When you look at the moon, it looks like it's blood red. And when you look at the stars, well, you can't see them because there's too much ash
Right.
in the sky. So
Right.
that's what it's all about. But
Yeah.
we kind of have these little news cycles, and we get all a little bit hysterical about it. So I've chilled out a whole bunch over this stuff, and I'm like, well,
Yeah.
when it happens, it happens. But I'm not gonna.
Yeah. Signs and
I,
wonders are
yeah,
communication, right?
yeah,
That's what it's supposed to be. I mean, but we're always supposed to be ready. We're always supposed to be, this isn't our
of course,
home. We're
yeah,
supposed to be willing and ready. And people get really panicked because I think they maybe don't have their bags packed or whatever, right? Like,
yeah,
and that's a metaphor for sure. But I'm just saying,
yeah,
like, these things happen and just be ready, just every
yeah.
day, try to be ready. Yeah, that's what I think
Actually,
anyway.
the Earth is our home. We're gonna live here forever, which is really cool. Now, the current world system is not our home,
Right.
right?
Yeah,
Right.
definitely
But planet Earth, God is reclaiming planet Earth. That will be corrupting image
not.
volume 4. Okay.
Right.
He's not going to destroy it or blow it up like the Death Star. he's going to reclaim this earth. He's going to take it back and make it back into the Garden of Eden that it's supposed to be. And I look forward to that day.
Absolutely.
That'll be great.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And I mean, with everything that we face as Christians, like, I mean, we know that there's a lot coming, but also like with the mark of the beast, people were really worried in 2020, and you will have knowledge. You will know that you're choosing that. It's not like they're going to slide it in a hamburger or something.
Right.
They're not going to
Exactly.
do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think that's a comfort for people, that's not how it works. I mean, it's not a
Yeah.
trick. It's a
Yeah.
choice.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So I've taken all the research from Corrupting Image volumes 1, 2, and 3, and I've put those into a novel. It's called Regenesis Code. And I'll tell you, writing a novel about the end times liberated me. I mean, because I had to take a lot of the things, that were all facts and figures and everything, and say, okay, how is this going to play out in real time? And
oh,
doing that in a fictional setting, it was just amazing because I had to, think outside the box. I had to think, okay, what could it really happen? Now, again, it is fiction, and it's my take on how it's going to happen, but it's thoroughly researched based on these 3 books, and I think people would really enjoy it. So it's called Regenesis Code. You can listen to it for free on YouTube if you want, or you can go to Amazon.com and you can get it there. Regenesis Code, and keep this in prayer, because the goal is to make this into like a Netflix series or a Hulu series or something.
awesome.
Because this is where people are. People are on their screens, right? They love
Mhm.
entertainment, and so I want to put a blockbuster type series or movie in front of them so that they can start getting the message of the kingdom in a way that is appealing, it's entertaining, and will
Yeah.
really stick with them. Remember back The Matrix? I mean, no, Matrix, the
Yeah.
first one. There was so much theology in there. I mean, it's just crazy how much theology there was, right? But it
Mhm.
was subtle. So that's what we're trying to do, is put a lot of theology in front of people, but make it subtle so it's entertaining, and they swallow it quite easily, right? Because it's like, oh,
Right.
that really is great. But at the end of the story, they're like, oh, so there's going to be this epic battle, and now I kind of see it. I kind of see how all these pieces fit together, and hopefully, if I and my co-author do our job, then they'll be rooting for the good guys and not the bad guys, right? They'll be excited that
Yes.
Jesus is coming back to save the day and not for the other guy. And I really
Right.
believe we can reach hundreds of millions of people with the good news of
Hmm.
the kingdom of God.
I think
So,
so too. I
you
think
know,
that would be super interesting. I think that would be
yeah,
a great way to present it, because you're right. People are retention of attention is really hard right now.
yeah,
So with a movie or something, I think you're headed in the right direction, because it's hard to get people, like even my own family. I'm like, "Oh yeah, you should listen to this new podcast I did. It was amazing." And they're like, "Meh." I'm
yeah,
like,
hmm,
okay. Unless you're already into podcasts, like
yeah,
people or whatever, that or books on, tape type situation. People don't really read anymore either.
hmm,
It's kind of hard to get it out there, and they want it quickly. Like you said,
yeah,
that sweet spot, like certain minutes. It's not an hour and 20 minutes. It's shorter, and I
yeah,
get that
yeah,
people are busy, and I
yep,
understand that, but
yeah,
also this is a lot to digest. Like you had to go 4 books here, basically, with the
yeah,
with the novel, to even
yeah.
get there. So
Yeah,
it's not
exactly.
simple.
I mean, it really is, and I get it. We're all busy, and so that's why putting it into just great entertainment, I think, is a really good way to do it. I just started a new channel. It's called Graceful Roar, and I'll give you the link, and maybe you can put that in the
Awesome.
description. But
Yes.
I would love it
Yes.
if people signed up for it, subscribed to it, and we have a movie on Nimrod. So a lot of the things that
Ah,
I've talked about here, if you want to see that in about a 9-minute video, it's well produced, and this picture is just me talking, right? So you're not going to see me, but you'll hear my voice, and I'm explaining about Nimrod. So if people want to go into more depth on that and don't want to read the books, then we're going to start making these short 9-10 minute videos so that it's easily digestible. You can watch it on your break or whatever. and
That's perfect.
yeah, and have some cool pictures and footage. So I'm excited about that, and yeah, help us to grow this channel. We really want it to get big, and just for people to be able to go there and say, oh, that's cool. So it'll be based on my 3 books, well, and others as well. So yeah.
Do you go further down do you get to Tammuz and all that eventually, or do you stay more in Nimrod?
Well, in this video,
Just
it's mostly
curious.
about Nimrod. Yeah.
I mean,
Tammuz
later in
is,
the
yeah, the whole Tammuz Semiramis thing is really a misnomer. That was something that Alexander Hislop kind of created, and
Mm.
that's sort of become the go-to for a lot of Christians, which I think is unfortunate because Hislop just made up some things. Semiramis was a queen of Assyria in about the 7th or 8th century BC, but she wasn't a major player, and she was not at all any kind of a goddess. Okay, so
Mm.
now Tammuz is interesting. Um, Tammuz means the sun. It comes from Sumerian. Uh, but there's no relationship between Semiramis and Tammuz. That's just something that Alexander Hislop
Okay.
made up. So Ishtar
Huh?
or Inanna, that's the one that we should look at, right? Not Semiramis.
Right.
So just for what it's worth, just throwing that out there.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the pagan holidays that all surround Ishtar is pretty interesting as well. I don't think people always realize, and I'm not saying never celebrate another thing or just only do this or that, but uh, as a kid, I always grew up going, what does the rabbit have to do anything? Like, why are there
Yeah.
eggs coming out of rabbit too? Like, what is this about? And then you
Yeah.
figure it out and you're like, oh, right. And, of course, everything gets turned upside down when those that are nefarious get a hold of it, right? Like they
Right.
don't want you celebrating Passover. Or they changed. I mean, actually, the Catholic Church had a big hand in this, but I mean,
Well,
yeah.
ironically, it was William Tyndale he was the first to translate the Bible into English from the Greek in the New Testament. And he gave us the term Passover. He coined that,
Hmm.
which is really amazing. But then having no knowledge of the feasts, no knowledge of the Jews, if you were a Jew back then, you wanted to keep that quiet, right?
Hmm.
So, these guys had no knowledge of the feast. They didn't. So what's funny is that when Jesus is talking to his disciples in the Tyndale translation, and he's talking about Passover, he says, I have greatly desired to eat this Easter with you, right?
Hmm.
And you're like, wait, Easter is talking about Passover, okay? And again, William Tyndale is the one who coined the term Passover, right?
Right.
So, the guy was just ignorant, unfortunately. He was ignorant on the feast. He had no idea what was really going on. And so the term Easter, that is very much an English term. If you look at Spanish and French, for example, when it talks about Easter in those languages, the Easter Sunday, let's call it that. They call it Le Pâques or Pascua, which means Pesach, right? I mean, that's what it's coming from. So there's been a lot of misunderstanding about this over the centuries. I think some of it, at least on the part of William Tyndale, was done in just complete ignorance. I think very
Mhm.
innocently. The guy was, burned at the stake for his faith. So I think he was the
Yeah.
real deal. I don't think he was
Yeah.
trying to deceive anybody. He just didn't understand. And
Right.
probably the greater mystery to me sometimes is, why does God allow these things to happen? Why does God just sort of set the record straight? And I don't know. I don't know why
Yeah.
he allows, misinformation, disinformation to take root. And we live with these things for centuries. But I do know this: stay humble, right? Because there's a lot of
Yes.
stuff we don't know. And the moment we start thinking that we have it all figured out, we don't. And
Definitely not.
so yeah, we got to stay humble and just allow God to keep working, and He's going to do that. So, well, thank
Amazing.
you so
Well,
much for having me
tell
on. I really
yes.
Yeah, I really
One more
appreciate it. This was great. Yeah. please.
about all your channels, all your stuff, everything, where to find you, and all
Yeah.
your information.
So, well, you can go on YouTube. You can go to Douglas Hamp Ministries. That's on YouTube. Also, the new channel is called Graceful Roar. So Graceful Roar, again, we'll have that in the description. And then you can go to my website, douglashamp.com, if you want to look at my articles and such. I'm also on academia.edu. You can just put in my name or Corrupting the Image, and you'll find a lot of my, I try to put up all my articles as far as I could. So I got a lot of stuff on there, which is fun. And then you can also check me out at the Way Congregation. So I have a local congregation in Lakewood, Colorado. That's in Denver. So if people are, looking for a church, please do join us every Saturday, 10:30. You can join us there, or you can join me on my YouTube channel, Douglas Hamp Ministries, and you can catch the service there as well.
Amazing. Well, I will be putting all of these links, as many as you want. Just send me whatever you want in there and I'll attach everything, because this all is great information and I think they should check into it. I know you have a lot of stuff that's out there. Also on Spotify, if you just put in his name, there's a whole bunch of podcasts that come up and they're great. So you can learn some stuff. That's what I've been doing.
Awesome.
So I appreciate your work. I really do, because I know
Thank you.
it's hard. Yeah. And I appreciate you coming on. Thank you
My
so
pleasure.
much.
Thank you.
Yes. Have a blessed day.
You too.